In this episode, we cover part 3 of the presentation we've been going through with a lot to cover.
Don't just go hog wild and just start spraying everything everywhere and then you're like, my railroad doesn't work.
We take a look at everything from rail sides to wheel sides, the techniques that I use to achieve these effects, the products that I use, why you might blow apart a locomotive.
Well, geez, that seems like it's a little bit much to weather it.
You don't have to get crazy to get great results. I share the avenues of where I find great inspiration as well as check in on
the Curmudgeon's Gripe of the Week.
Only in this episode of Sue the Milwaukee Road.
All right, diving into the details, we're going to look at just some of the simple upgrades that are out there. One of the first things that I would probably say that a modeler that's starting out, and even guys that have been in the hobby for a long time, one thing you can do is just paint your wheel sides. The wheel sides themselves, if you ever see the bright silver wheel side on a model railroad, you know it's a railroad. You know it's a model railroad. You don't ever see the prototype rolling along with those big shiny silver wheels. The least you could do as far as technique, I actually learned this one recently from Greg Dahl, a fellow modeler here in the Twin Cities, is just use a felt, he uses a fabric marker, and it just uses a marker essentially, spins it and it paints the wheel side. You had a dark brown that works well in that application. I had used Flow Quill's rail tie brown that you can lay it down, same type of thing. It's an oil-based paint, so it's not probably ideal as far as the scent. The fabric one is a lot cleaner. And then lastly, I used to just use acrylic paint. I would just use a black, flat black paint and I would roll it, or I'd use rail tie brown paint and lay it down and wait for it to dry. And then I'd use chalks to be able to adjust and kind of give it that more of a gritty look to it, like the prototype. For the side frames, I use a spray-on flat camouflage paint. It's a rattle can paint. I end up just taking a couple of plastic wheels, putting it into the truck frame, and then spraying it that way. So I don't get paint down into the journals, and I don't know how big of a deal that is. Some guys say that it's an issue, some don't. So that's one thing to kind of address. Paint your wheel sides. It makes it pretty simple. Another thing that goes right with that, let's say you finish a freight car, it looks fantastic, it's weathered nice, you got the trucks all done up nice, and you set that thing down in your railroad and you get the low angle
Because your cell phone can get a lot lower.
and you get this beautiful shot and you shoot it across your railroad, and the rail sides are this bright nickel silver. Paint the rail sides. It's fairly straightforward. Same type of techniques that I mentioned. You could use that fabric pen. You could also use a paint pen, or just use the spray on. If you're doing the spray, obviously cover your floors, cover your walls, cover everything. I wear a ventilator whenever I'm spraying any of the type of paints or materials. Just once it's airborne, nobody needs it in their lungs. So do that. It gets a flat finish. Make sure you clear your rails off right away, as well as protect your switch points, and you don't just go hog wild and just start spraying everything everywhere and then you're like, my railroad doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you got to take the proper precautions. So tread lightly. Just think about some of those things to give your railroad a little better presence and visual eye candy. So those are a couple of tips that I'd say you can always kind of dive into right away. I did mention the journals of the trucks, and where you can spin those micro mark things to clean them out. So if you did get paint in there, you could always use that tool because it's a versatile tool.
Did you know in 1930 General Motors purchased Electromotive Company and Winton Engine Company, and in 1941 expanded EMC's realm to locomotive engine manufacturing as Electromotive Division, what we know as EMD today? What year did the GP60s visit the Twin Cities? Was it A, 1970, B, 1982, C, 1986, or D, 1989? Do you think you know the answer? Stick around, we'll find out in just a bit.
Weathering locomotives and freight cars. I think this is one thing that most of us model railroaders, you want to weather your equipment. You want to be able to make it look like the prototype. Either you're afraid to, or you overdo it, or you mess it up and you think,
Oh, I can't go back.
if you use chalks, there's a little bit of forgiveness there. If you don't put any dull coat on it to begin with and you weather the car with the chalk, you can obviously wipe it all off, or wipe it off fairly well. I model the Sioux line, so white is a little less forgiving. But I find that some of that subtlety and then wiping it all off gives it a little bit of that grit. Underdoing it is better than overdoing it. We're so used to seeing so many cars of today being neglected to the point that they're just rust buckets and they look terrible. But if you're modeling the 80s or even the 90s,
They're not that bad.
I look at videos. Bob Rivard posts a lot of prototype videos that really kind of show you the evolution of freight cars. He's got shots from the 70s, got some stuff in the 80s, a little bit in the 90s, and you look at all the shots. He was shooting full consists or trains in length. And you get to sit there and look at it and go, not that dirty, not that beat up. Oh, there's one that's a little rough, but not that bad. So your whole train doesn't need to look like that it's been through, tough times. Now, modern day cars, some of them have been around a long time. I just recently saw a BN hopper that was 1974. Thought, that's kind of cool. BN 74, big BN logo. Jeff would probably enjoy that, BN. But when we're looking at some of the elements that are out there on the weathering side of things, scale it back. Less is more. I use Doc O'Brien's weathering chalks. I use a Tester's flat finish. They have a clear coat that goes on nice. The reason I like it because it's really dead flat. Now I did purchase some Rust-Oleum. It's called Dead Flat Dull Coat, and it's not as flat as that Tester's. I'm being a little bit picky in regards to the actual paint application. Does it work? Yes. There's also one that's a fixative by Krylon, and it's another clear coat that you can spray on. Does it work? Yes. I saw NS Modeler 24. He's a Norfolk Southern modeler that sprayed it all over a brass locomotive, and I thought, oh, this kid does nice work, and if he's spraying that stuff all over a brass locomotive, I'm going to give it a shot. So I did. It's got a little bit of a sheen to it. It's not dead flat like I like, but that would be good for a clear coat on a car that you weather that's maybe 2 or 3 years old. It's still got a little sheen, but it's still flat. That's also nice to use on some of your 187 scale vehicles. You can either tape off the windows or take them apart and then just spray the car so it's not that gloss shiny. The specular highlights that you're going to see on a car of 187 scale, in real life, those highlights would be huge. So knocking down some of that sheen is a detail that you can help kind of pull things back. Now, one thing I know people are really intimidated by, and that's actually weathering locomotives. It's one of the things that I've always kind of steered clear of a little bit, but as I've gotten better and better in modeling, as I say, grow with the modeling, the actual locomotive, a lot easier to dull coat. I take it apart completely.
I take it off the chassis, I take the locomotive, I take the motor out, I take the trucks out, I pull side frames off. I mean, I blow the things apart.
And you say, well, geez, that seems like it's a little bit much to weather it.
I think you get a better effect. I can tape off the bolsters and I can go through and dull coat it and weather it and then reassemble everything. And I think aesthetically it gives it a better look than trying to do it when it's all assembled. I paint the wheel sides and then I can make sure that I'm not getting the contacts of the wheels where the electrical pickups are. So there's just little things that I've learned over time that end up giving me a better product. But locomotives, as intimidating as they are, I suggest you can even just use, if you don't want to take them apart, block off the windows with the blue painter's tape. If you're taking the shell off, block off the windows with the blue painter's tape and block it off underneath so that dull coat doesn't accidentally spray up underneath and get on the inside of the window. Little details like that can go a long way. Sometimes just flat finishing stuff makes it look better. I know my dad goes through a lot of times and he's flat finishing almost every car that goes out on the railroad. It seems like a tedious process, but that also means that one, the paint is going to cure, the clear coat will cure enough that when he goes to weather it, it's ready to go. You don't have to wait for it to dry. Sometimes we accelerate the process too much. We kind of hurry through it. I'm guilty of it 100%, is that I'll lay down stuff and then I'll lay down another, chalk and then I spray it again. I'm doing it all in such a short period of time that
Actual taking your time goes a long way.
But when we look forward on other things with the cars, a detail that I find really interesting is actually the couplers. And people think,
Oh gosh, a coupler conversation?
we're going to go down that road. And yeah, we are. Horn hooks versus plastic versus KD. KD all the way. I know people a lot of times are sitting there like, KDs. Well, I don't use KD number 5s. I use scale KDs. And my dad uses number 5s exclusively, or for the most part. He's got a few of those scale cars. Cars that came with them, he left the scale couplers on it. But he likes the coupler face. The amount of face when your track work is not even, number 5s are more forgiving. Those couplers can move up and down. One thing I do like about the number 5, at least that series, is that they make downshift couplers. If your coupler is sitting low, they make an upshift coupler. They make longer shank, shorter shank, so you can adjust the coupler's, basically position in a lot of different ways simply by buying a different coupler that KD makes. It makes them more universal. Among your railroad, you can switch them out between one another. Another mind-blowing detail that they added to theirs was the whisker coupler. You no longer needed that copper flat spring that KDs used to use. Now, I know a lot of people say, they're like,
Well, most cars come with couplers already on them.
Walthers, their wannabe KD coupler, it's this big, huge monster of a thing.
That's a huge coupler.
It's not, it's compatible. Yes, it functions and it works. But having consistency does go a long way. This is something that we've learned with over time. We've had issues with a coupler here or there, and it's kind of like you pop it off and you find out, well, that's an Atlas coupler. Well, that was a Walthers coupler. Well, that was another knockoff coupler. Staying consistent, it seems like it's a very petty little thing to be doing. I did it to most of my rolling stock as I purchased it over the years. So I just slowly kind of was making that effort. But they do sell bulk packs if you want to dive into that. The same goes with metal trucks. I end up adding metal wheels on everything I have. For the most part, most of the stuff I purchase now has metal wheels. But there is occasionally a car that might have plastic wheels that needs the Intermountain metal wheels. I like the Intermountain ones. I think they're the best metal wheel replacement out there. But there are other manufacturers, and each person that likes what they like. But that's what we like to use.
All right, it's time to answer that quiz question. I sure hope Greg Dahl's phone wasn't ringing off the hook because he doesn't like to get up. He's enjoying his beverage. What year did the GP60s visit the Twin Cities? The answer was C, 1986. Greg shot this photo down at the Milwaukee Road turntable in the Suit Line era.
So I think couplers are a huge part of it. The coupler height gauge, as I mentioned before, that is nice to be able to determine exactly, having standards that are set in such a way that we are guaranteed that that coupler height is right. It's going to match up with all the other cars. The more refined you get with stuff like that, the better your operations as well as railroad's going to function. I know, it seems like I'm covering a lot of just,
Oh yeah, same old, got it, yeah.
but we're all at different paces of this. There are guys out there that have heard none of this stuff that I've mentioned just previously. And there are some guys that
We know it all.
So that's about all I need to say about couplers. I think there's a lot to be said for having the coupler height gauge as well as maintaining a standard as far as your couplers are concerned. Now moving forward, the buildings, I think buildings have their place too. There's a lot of details that can be had within the building. It's going to the prototype is my suggestion here. People say, well, it's kits versus scratch built. Buildings, I'd say scratch build all the way. You can use some kits and kind of maybe kit bash, but the actual structures themselves, I'm doing a grain elevator industry, so most of those grain elevators are just Schedule 40 PVC that I've ripped in half, but you get wider diameters, you can get skinnier diameters, and those at least allow you the ability to have the look of a lot of prototypical grain elevators, because not all grain elevators are made the same. They've got a little difference to them, so they're not all the Walthers, same old, same old. That's one thing I would suggest trying to avoid. I think the details that can be found within a building and people can look at and go, oh, I know where that is. That's the Hiawatha Elevator District. And if you can at least set the scene, at least to that point, you're bringing that one step further in terms of trying to achieve the reality you're trying to create. But the last thing that I want to cover is actually the community itself. I want to thank Ken for putting together a program like this. This is a great opportunity for us to be able to share information with one another. Ken has put together the Twin Cities Modelers Retreat for I don't know how long. He actually just a couple of years ago had said,
Why don't you come down? Just check it out.
and at first I thought,
Well, I suppose I got to try to find a time of the weekend. And, just excuses.
finally went down there, had the opportunity to meet a number of different fellow modelers, and lo and behold, I've actually made a lot of good friends over the last few years. And that's thanks to an event like the Modelers Retreat. Now, this is part of the NMRA world, and the NMRA world, people a lot of times are like,
Eesh, stay away from that scary little group of people.
some of those master model railroaders are
Odd ducks, you know what I'm saying?
and the reason why I say that is because
There are a lot of odd ducks.
and when it really comes down to it, I've got to know a lot of the master model railroaders are out there, and man, they know a lot. That's a great way to share information. They're trying to share as much of the information as they can that's out there. I know there's a Twin Cities Model Railroader NMRA podcast, and anybody that goes on to either go on your iPhone or go into whatever your podcast provider is and just type in the
Twin Cities division. You can even do it in Google and you'll pop up and see the episodes that are available. They're definitely worth listening to, so check them out.
Speaking of podcasts, one of my favorite ones is AML. It's A Modeler's Life. And Lionel Strang used to work for Model Railroader. He's gone off on this tangent to create this kind of a monster in itself. And that's a lot of just interviews with a lot of different manufacturers and fellow modelers and just talking about life in a lot of cases. It can be kind of funny. It's a little change of pace. I a lot of times listen to it when I'm working on the railroad. So it's a great avenue. I know one of the things I like most about that particular podcast is that they interview the manufacturers. Jason Schron from Rapido has been on there a number of times. And man, that guy, he's entertaining to begin with, but he also covers a lot of the content that we don't hear from manufacturers. A lot of times he talks about
how many locomotives have to be made to have a lot, and then justification, and then the difficulties of tooling, and why can't you go HO right to end,
and all these complications that might be involved with the actual manufacturing, what it takes to actually create model railroad rolling stock and locomotives. So there's something to be said for that. And I think those spaces within the communities that we're able to bebop around and kind of get information here and get information there, and you get them at flea markets and you get them at operating sessions and you get them through avenues like this. I've been putting together a YouTube channel for the last, 2-3 years. It's called Sue the Milwaukee Road.
Only in this episode, Sue the Milwaukee Road.
And I put that content out just to share the information. Here's what we're doing. Here's the technique I'm using. This is the project I'm working on this week. Merely sharing the information. Some cases it encourages fellow modelers. I know some guys have, they've done the Great Northern Scale car that I've done. And they says, well, I want to get the decals and I want to do one of those. So they do. And that's what makes it fun. It's about the sharing of information. If I can share information with you, I get information from a lot of you as well. So a big thanks to those guys that I mentioned earlier. I can't thank anybody enough that provides the information to us younger modelers, and hopefully in turn I'm able to pass this information down to the future modelers. You don't have to be born into the hobby to be able to learn with the hobby. You can eventually learn it just as you kind of go along. We're learning as we go. I know you're learning as you go, but thankfully we've got platforms like this, as well as content and information that we can share with one another on so many different avenues, whether it's these videos, whether it's the podcasts, whether it's the flea markets that we attend. Either way, a huge thanks to Ken Ziska for putting this thing together, the fellow MMR guys that are out there that are sharing the information with these younger guys. If you're considering becoming an MMR type guy, join the NMRA and check out what they've got going on. I know it seems like kind of a cool little challenge just to do the credits and all that stuff in itself, so it might be worth it. A huge thanks to the community, and I will continue rambling if I don't wrap this up. So thank you guys for tuning in. Be sure to hop onto YouTube and check out Sue the Milwaukee Road, or if you want to see more of my dad's railroad, you can go onto the GN in 1970. Type them into Google, type them into YouTube, you'll find us eventually. That's all we've got for now. A big thanks to all of you, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care.
Alright, here's a curmudgeon coming at you for the gripe of the week.
The gripe of the week this week is about those MMRs, Master Model Railroaders, those people out there in their special little clubs, and they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society. Well, I tell you right now, I've met some of these awesome other railroaders, and I tell you, they're just these guys, and someone says, hey, did you meet that guy? He's an MMR. And I says, oh, that guy over there, that's just Tom. He's a real good modeler. I didn't know he was one of those people. And they say, yeah, he's in one of them clubs, and he's just a very special guy. Well, when it really comes down to it, unless you get to know them, I guess you really don't know what they're like. But as far as I'm concerned, they're all just a bunch of highbrow, stuffy little guys. And that's a curmudgeon's gripe of the week. And they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society.
A big thanks to everybody that watches to the end, that has hit like, hit subscribe, as well as made comments in the past. It's those actions that help share this content, so if you haven't checked out other episodes, feel free to do so. You can also check out the tour of the GN in 1970, as well as the past episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s.
And they're all like, oh yes, we're very high society.